So let's dive into it. Today, as you all know who signed up, we're here for Alphabet Soup, a developer's guide to security acronyms. And why we called it Alphabet Soup? It's easy. It's because there's so many different acronyms, they kind of all soup together and blend, right? So today we're going to demystify some of that security jargon and break it down from a developer perspective so you can better understand what these acronyms mean, which ones you should be paying attention to, and how to cut through all that noise. So before we dive in, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Spectre Collective. Here at ReversingLabs, we've actually started a community program and we've called it Spectre Collective, so everybody can join. What this means is we're here because developers build, security finds the cracks, developers move fast, security sometimes slows things down. It's the same dance every time in every company in every industry. So here we've been thinking a lot about this, right? So how do we get the two groups to talk together? And this is exactly what we're doing here today. We're having where development meets security, and we're talking about these topics that have both groups in mind. So over the next few months, we're going to be slowly rolling out some more features for the community. So make sure you stay tuned and be a part of it. So let's dive in to today's topic and speakers. So before we get into it, I'm going to let Frank and Igor introduce themselves, but I'm very excited for our two guests here today. First, we're going to go with Frank Nagle, assistant professor at Harvard Business School. And Frank, I won't steal your thunder, but I know you have been heavily invested in this community for quite some time with research and doing many good talks, papers, you name it. So Frank, for the folks at home, please let us get used to your voice and tell us a little bit about you and why you're interested in today's topic.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. First of all, great to be with you both. Indeed, as Katie was alluding to, my career started in cybersecurity a long time ago, and so I was working with all these acronyms on a daily basis. I was in this field before many of them existed, so I had a lot of experience on the pen testing side and forensics, on the defensive side, on all sorts of different pieces of the industry. And then later, my focus moved to more focusing on open source software. So a lot of the research that I do now is about open source. Cybersecurity is a piece of that, but also thinking about open source AI and just kind of how companies think about engaging with open source. And certainly open source, my interest in it started from the cybersecurity world, and I know that there's always these concerns about is it more or less secure than proprietary software. So those are the things that kind of led me into the space that I'm in now. But I've been doing more work recently, coming back to the cybersecurity space and thinking more about not only the intersection of open source, but other aspects of business decisions related to cybersecurity. I don't put it up next to my name anymore, but actually it's good you mentioned the CPE credits. I have a CISSP, if that still means anything in this world. So do we get CPE credits too? Just kidding. But it's great to be here and looking forward to talking about all these different acronyms.
Thanks for being here, Frank, and I might have to phone a friend to figure out if you get those credits. Igor Lasic, our other esteemed panelist today. I'm very excited about this. He's our SVP of Engineering here at ReversingLabs, so I'm very lucky he was able to take some time today to be here and a part of this conversation since he lives and breathes development day in, day out, and runs a large team. So Igor, do you mind just giving us a little bit of background on yourself and why you're here today?
Thanks, Kathy. So I run the development at ReversingLabs, so everything you can think of in that pipeline, if you will, from development to QA to DevSecOps to ITSec and all that. Lots of acronyms. So I go at it from the practitioner side, and I hope I can share my knowledge and experience with you guys.
I'm sure you'll be able to. So thank you both for giving us that quick background. So before we get into it, right, we're just going to flash some of these acronyms. There's pages of them, right? So some of them you may know, some of them you may not, but we're just giving you a taste of kind of what we're going to go through today. And I thought it might be fun to start with a quick polling question, right? We're going to do two of them real quick, and it's just to see how you guys feel about the space for those of you at home. So for the first one, have you ever had to Google a security acronym during a meeting? Yes, all the time, occasionally, never, and just for fun, let's Google. So we're going to wait for a few of these to pop in occasionally. Okay. I'd fall into the occasional category as well. All right. So it's looking like the majority of this is occasionally at 80%. We do have yes all the time at 20 though, but it is good to know that we have no nevers and know what's Google. So we do know what those two are. All right, so we're gonna roll right into the second question. And this is just to get a better understanding of kind of where everybody at home is at and what you pay attention to the most. So what acronym do you pay the most attention to? CVE, CVSS, KEV, I don't really look, or other? All right. CVE is taking it away. We're doing a little bit of magic here. CVSS is also quite popular. About a quarter are saying don't really look at all. Okay. So these are some pretty interesting results. So CVE is coming in at 47%, CVSS at 32, KEV at 11, and then don't really look at all at 26. And then someone put something in the chat, so I will have to look at that. Usually because the same acronym means different things in the conversation. Totally fair. Okay. Well, based off that, we are going to open up the conversation with our first question for our panelists today. So we've talked through some of, those polling questions, right? Can you tell us what are the most common applications for security acronyms and why they're often most misunderstood? So we kind of talked about a few of them in that polling question, but what would you say are the most common application security acronyms that developers are faced with on a daily basis? Igor, you want to start?
I think we've been, from, again, a practitioner's point of view, preconditioned to look at the CVEs and the CVSS. I think industry is really focused on that. Is it worthwhile or not? It is. At least once a year, maybe once in 2 years, something comes out that is just incredibly dangerous. There was one of the Solar libraries that was easily exploited with very specific text, providing access to the system instantly, and it has a CVSS score of 10, and you had to plug it. So we look at that a lot. But even if you get a really high CVSS score, it doesn't really mean that it's exploitable. That then the concept of reachability comes along. So again, from my perspective, we spend a lot of time on the scoring, and then trying to figure out whether it's exploitable, and finally whether there's a fix or where is the workaround. And some of these things are incredibly dangerous, so you do have to mind them.
So Igor, you brought up something that I'm not sure if everybody at home knows is reachability. Do you mind just giving us a little bit of background on what you meant by that when you're talking about seeing those things that are CVSS scores like 10, but is it reachable?
Well, the strict definition of reachability would be whether something's exploitable, and there's like tools that can help you with that. Mostly around the, I'm just gonna start throwing acronyms. So SAST and SCA. So you can make like code graphs and whatnot that can then give you some theoretical number around reachability. I use it in a slightly different sense. For me, reachability is yes, whether it's reachable in that theoretical sense, but it's also whether it's plausible and how difficult it is to exploit something. If a library that you inherit through some include or another or import is inactive, and someone actually needs to get through your firewall, get access to the system, log in, put like custom code on and execute it to exploit something, I consider that relatively low threat. Even it might have a really high score. So again, reachability in like a strict sense is just how plausible is it on a theoretical level through code analysis. I look at it more from that perspective. Plus, what does the attacker have to do?
Thanks for that. Frank, what are your thoughts? I saw
Yeah,
you
so
shake your head.
I echo Igor's sentiments around CVE and CVSS. I remember I was in this world when CVSS first came out, and I think everybody agreed, like, it wasn't perfect, okay, fine, but it was nice to have some common language to be able to think about, okay, this vulnerability, how do we think about how bad it is, right? And I think that has continued, for the past 20 years, right, to be a useful language to allow everybody to speak the same language. And 100% to Igor's point, we think about, risk versus and times likelihood. Likelihood may be super low, but the risk may be super high if it affects your particular environment, right? And I think that having that common language of CVSS really allows everybody to think about how bad is this, and will it affect my, or if it if we have those types of systems or whatever it is that's vulnerable, how bad is it going to be, right? And I think that at the same way, I'll throw SBOM on there as a maybe this is going to be super useful, right? We're gonna I think we're still a tiny bit early, even though SBOM's been around for a couple of years now. But I do think that I've talked to so many companies that they don't even know what they're running, right? And so they don't know, they don't, or they certainly don't know what's baked into the software that they're running, right? And so I think for them, it's even hard to use a CVSS score because they just don't, they don't know if they're affected, right? Like they don't, to Igor's point, they don't know if they have those. So I do think that SBOMs will become more useful as more companies produce them, more companies understand how to consume them, because then you can, again, in an ideal world, you can think about, all right, we have a list of everything we run. We see a new CVE come out with a CVSS score associated with it. We can understand, is this something we need to, take care of immediately, right? So I think the combination of those are going to be, particularly important, right? And so that's where I would say, so we'll see if SBOM becomes, more everyday usage as the world evolves.
Yeah, definitely more prevalent as more and more people, that education has gotten out there too. Because I think that's also part of the issue with understanding SBOMs is that education gap, right? Or maturity model.
Yes, agreed.
Can you briefly explain, how different acronyms are kind of categorized? For example, like risk management or threat detection. Are there certain ones where you put them in a more severe category based off the importance of them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think, for me, it always kind of comes back to risk and likelihood, but risk means different things, right? So if you're out of compliance, then that's, that's a problem, right? And then thinking about, the broader sense of risk management is a piece of that as well, right? And so I think, the way that we think about categorizing them, and this sort of goes back to an earlier comment from the crowd, that different acronyms can mean different things at different times, and how we think about grouping them and categorizing them is going to be dependent on exactly what part of the job you're doing, right? So Igor working on software development, we're going to think about things in one way. For my my past working on forensics or on vulnerability, on red teaming and things like that, we think about it a little bit differently. And now working with boards, and everybody has to take this more into account. They're thinking about they don't need to know all of these acronyms, but they certainly need to know some of them, or at least understand the most relevant ones as well.
Yeah. Igor, what are your thoughts? I know you also have to report to a board, so are there certain categories in that risk management that keep you up at night, or that you think have more importance than others?
As Frank's saying, what keeps me up at night is humans first and foremost. That's like the easiest attack vector. Yeah, it's really difficult to go in front of the board if you have any type of breach, or if you actually didn't do your job and covered something you should have, and that gets penetrated. So we do a lot of work to make sure that doesn't happen. So all those acronyms, all the work is towards that goal to kind of reduce the attack surface, reduce possibility, reduce the risk to prevent any reportable event. Reportable event is horrible consequences to revenue, to company standing. It's really something to be avoided at all costs. So all the things we're talking about today and many more are part of reducing that risk, risk management as a practice.
And I'll echo the sentiment about the human being the weak link. One of my favorite T-shirts I see at DEF CON is always the one that says, social engineering, because there is no patch for human stupidity, right?
That's right.
I do.
That's right.
I give the benefit of the doubt to some folks. It's not always stupidity. Sometimes it's they don't know, they haven't been trained properly, et cetera, et cetera. But right. Inevitably, the human is always the easiest way into any system, right? And so I think we've seen a broader increase in cybersecurity awareness in the general public, and certainly more companies are doing more types of training to at least make sure people are familiar with basic phishing types of things, and kind of the basics, and that if something happens they should report it and who they should report it to. But certainly I think the human will always be the weakest link in this chain.
I would agree, right? Because you have those examples like XC attack, where it was credentials, someone social engineering in, and we're starting to see a lot more of that now moving forward too. So I would agree with that. Now, how do terms, so we've talked a little bit about CVE, CVSS, right? We brought up SBOM. How do terms like SBOM, SCA, Igor, you brought up SAS, but there's also DAS, BRASP. It sounds like I'm making up a song, but I'm not, I promise. How do they affect the software development lifecycle from, the development point of view and what you're incorporating in for security practices?
Developers don't like anything that slows them down, quotes, right? For them to be, from my perspective, asking them to be security aware and have security aware designs and architecture is, still in relative infancy. But it's you have to think about it from the entire pipeline. I call it a pipeline. It's really like a SDLC, from sort of inception, requirements coming from product management and architecture you build through development. And then finally, when you start looking at how to build something, we have provided guidelines around what's acceptable to use from open source. And we have all that alphabet soup of one way or the other included in our CI/CD pipeline. So we have tried to include elements of secure architecture, of SAST and DAST and SCA, all of that in the pipeline. To be quite honest, our customers forced us. Because they start demanding reports with each release we provided. So financials are, I would say, much further ahead than any other industry, and they demanded these types of security reports from us. Must be 2018, 2019. So we had to go and build all that, and it was quite painful in the beginning to plug it, because we honestly used OS as a base, and if we'd worked, we would rarely update. So we had this just mountain to climb at first. So it can be quite, if you're not doing it all the time, it just can be this really, really high mountain to climb. So it was maybe 20-30% of our entire efforts when we started, and now it's in the single digits, 5% of the resources are dealing with that. But again, it's a painful conversation. Hey, you gotta patch this. Yeah, you might have to change your software because the library changed. It's just what you have to do. There's just no way around it. Everybody around us, I mean, all our customers are asking for it now. Some of them are asking for SBOMs, not really every single person, but the security ports with the SASDAST pen testing, that's very, very common.
That's good. That's good to hear from the customers are getting more engaged. I'm sure it adds more work to your team, right? But I think it's, you know, again, that general security awareness is a good thing, right? When we think about it. And I'll pick up on the SEAs just because I've done a bunch of work with software composition analysis companies, which, by the way, apparently SEA also stands for the Specialty Coffee Association. So, you know, I think this goes back to the earlier comment about context matters when we're talking acronyms. But with SEAs, I think, you know, again, like open source is layered, right? And all software is layered. And so you as a developer may know you're calling library 123, whatever it is, but you don't necessarily think about all the libraries that library is called, right? And I think that's often where the SCAs and other, you know, other tools with the ability to dig in deeper in the software really help understand, you know, okay, you know, yes, there's nothing wrong with this package, but some package that it calls has some, you know, CVSS 10 vulnerability, right? And I think that was, you know, a lot of the examples with like log4j and things like that, where we had these kind of super, you know, bad things or, you know, super impactful vulnerabilities. But many people didn't even realize that it was, you know, running somewhere deep in their system, right? And in some software. And so I think this, you know, transparency and it's not even about transparency, it's just about like looking into the software supply chain, right? You know, understanding what's being baked into the software that you're using or that you're building is particularly important as we think about, you know, the SDLC, and which I don't know, did we even say SDLC, Software Development Lifecycle, another acronym. And I think that's, you know, very important, right? And I will add to that too, you know, I wrote a teaching case about what happened with SolarWinds a few years back at this point, and we, you know, worked with them and got to understand. And, you know, I think the attackers have become so much more sophisticated than they used to be, even over just the past few years, that you have to really think about the whole life cycle, right? It's not just when you're writing the code, make sure you don't make any bugs and put anything in there by mistake, but, you know, thinking about the bad guys as well and making sure that they're not getting into the build process or anything else, which is what happened in the case of SolarWinds. So I do think that it's become, you know, software development has become more complex because of cybersecurity, but it's a necessary complexity, right? And I think that that's something that's only going to continue. And certainly, you know, we're not here to talk about Gen AI and vibe coding and all these fun things, but certainly, you know, the role of the coder is going to evolve, I can imagine. But this need to, you know, understand what's being baked into the code and thinking about cybersecurity is only going to become more important, not less, as we, you know, rely on more complex tools to help us write code.
So Igor, I think you might have lost some sleep during SolarWinds, but I saw you nodding along when Frank was talking about it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I saw you nodding along deeply with that.
Yeah, Log4j was a big deal. Absolutely. Like we had to scan everything. We got hundreds of servers, thousands of containers, thousands of virtual machines, and we had to look for it everywhere. That was really nasty vulnerability. And we have APIs using something that eventually used it as well. So to Frank's point, like you could see attacks like immediately. So if you expose an open port on internet, you can guarantee within 10, 20, 15 minutes, it's gonna get scanned for all kinds of stuff, all kinds of vulnerabilities. It's quite amazing. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely dynamic.
I think what's interesting about the Log4j story is it was, you know, such pandemonium, but we still see people downloading that package. You know,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
read a report that was like 20% of the downloads is still the malicious
Sure.
version.
Vulnerable. Yeah,
Sure.
the work that we did with the SEAs to do a couple of years ago. Actually, I guess we released a new one about a year ago, but a census of open source usage. And so we worked with the SEAs to see what open source packages thousands of companies were using within the software they were building. And indeed, unfortunately, Log4j is just one example, but many companies are still baking in outdated, vulnerable open source packages into the software, which is, again, as you are alluded to, right, like that sometimes it's hard to even track that and understand what you're baking in. But I think in these cases, we'll go all the way back to our discussion on CVSS for those things that are super bad. We need to pay particular attention and make sure that we're not baking in these backdoors and all sorts of unintentional malicious pieces that is easily fixable by updating the version of the open source package that we're using.
Yeah. So we also got a good comment in from Dave Busby. He said I think in addition to the complexity is helping to find other issues besides security, such as performance, business logic issues that can be used to add to budget arguments in some cases. Any thoughts on that? I thought that was a pretty good comment.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think like I'm in a strategy department now, and the number one thing we say on the first day of class to our students is that everything is about trade-offs, and if you decide to do one thing, you're deciding not to do another thing, right? And I think when I teach cybersecurity, we could spend every dollar we get on cybersecurity easily. We could definitely do that, right? But then we wouldn't, have any other part of the business, right? And so I think that finding that right balance is different for different companies, right? Do you have customer data? Do you have financial data? Do you have, are your clients particularly likely to be attacked, right? Like these types of things, I think are all, pieces of the puzzle to find that balance between performance and security, right? That's a constant struggle, and there's no right answer, but there should be a good answer for your company, right? For your particular operation.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'll just say never let crisis go. I always use crisis as opportunity, so that's all I'm gonna say. So there's always opportunity for budget and all kinds of conversations when crisis arises.
I think your
Never,
next.
never let it go to waste.
I think especially when you have these big news events, right? Like that you as the either if you're developing software or if you're in the cybersecurity infrastructure and within a company, thinking about, okay, what could have happened here and what didn't, and what was the downside, right? I think that's unfortunately, cybersecurity is often thought of as kind of insurance, and we we only care about it if things go wrong, right? And bad stuff happens. And I think that's good news is increasingly top level management is coming to understand these types of things as more than just that when you have all these big events. But we've done a bit of research. I don't know if it ever became public, but you can see that, like, just as an example, when this is not like real, but like just using an example, when Target gets hacked, Walmart starts spending more on cybersecurity, right? So companies are paying attention to what's going on in their industry. And I do think that can be a useful conversation to have with managers. Our competitor just got hit, like that's, and shows that people are going after our type of company, and we should start thinking more about what we're investing in cybersecurity and, and increasing that budget. Again, not to 100% of revenue, but we can argue on the precise amount, but certainly there's always room to have more investment in cybersecurity.
It's definitely like, to Igor's point, it's opportunity out of crisis, but it's also seeing that these hackers have found a way to get into that industry, right? So if it can get into one place, why not the other one? Because they're probably using similar systems. So
totally, I agree with that. I mean, that's why you see, especially in like ransomware world, you'll see like, oh, a whole bunch of hospitals just got hit, or a whole bunch of city governments just got hit, right? Like once one is shown to be to be hit and willing to pay, then we're going to go after all of them, right? And, and I think that's often a misperception too about who the attackers are, right? Like you think about these individual teenagers in their parents' basement, right, type of thing, the classic like hacker view of things. But in this day and age, it's much more organized, much more, cyber criminal syndicates that are working together. We have specialization of labor, different people are doing different parts of things. And so, I think that as the defender, whether as building software or in other capacities, you need to understand that you're facing substantial headwinds, right? And it's not just these kind of one-off lone folks. They're organized groups. And if your industry gets hit and is shown to be vulnerable, then you should expect a flurry of attacks against yourself.
And it sounds crazy because to your point, I used to just think it was like a lone person in their mom's basement, But the thing is someone, to your point, is just as hard as we work to keep them out, they work just as hard to get in. Like full
Even harder, right?
Yeah.
Even harder. And this was when I was, pre-professor life, when I was working in cybersecurity, my favorite thing to do was red team, because all I had to do as the attacker or the pretend attacker in that was find one way in, right? Like you as the defender had to defend against everything. Me as the attacker, I just had to find one way in, and then you were in trouble, right? And so I think that's the constant cat and mouse game that we have, that we have to play, is that it's much harder to defend than it is to attack. And now with how well resourced the attackers are and how well organized they are, it's only gotten harder.
Igor, any final thoughts on that before I get us back on track? But that was a fun little detour, I have to say.
Absolutely. I mean, it's you have to, as an IT-sec organization, you have to cover everything, all the possible vectors, and as Frank's saying, you just need one to work for the attacker. So it's I think it's, and open source is just another avenue. Before then, Frank knows, is Microsoft documents. It was like sneakernet and USBs, floppies. I mean, it just changes all the time. There's always something. We live in a connected world. There's always a way in.
I'll tie back to our social engineering discussion. You mentioned USB drives, but our highest success rate with social engineering attacks was dropping USB sticks, because we would have over 100% success rate, because people would stick it in their computer and say, I can't open this, and then give it to a friend, and then they try to open it too, and yeah, so it's much easier to attack than defend.
Oof, that is sketchy. Okay. Yeah. That makes my skin crawl a little bit hearing that. But all right, we're going to get back on track here, folks at home. We talked a little bit about SCA and SBOM, and I just want to talk about sometimes the pitfall, right? So SCA and SBOMs are great, but it doesn't cover the whole STLC for your protection. So just to make sure we're clear on, for folks at home, can you just talk a little bit about where the solution kind of falls short? And is there other things you should be looking to kind of use best of breed to make sure you are covering your entire SDLC from attacks like the crazy stuff we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, SCA just typically those solutions don't go very, very deep. And they primarily focus on vulnerabilities, and they're full of false positives. So it's a lot of work. It's just one. So you do have to do everything else as well. So our approach is, again, SCA and SAST and pen testing and some form of like DAST in terms of active scanning. So that's our combo. And the resulting SBOM is, as far as we're concerned, primarily used as a delivery to our customers, kind of to show we're doing a good job with licenses and components. So that's sort of how we view it. You can't just pick those two, SC and SBOM, and kind of say, yeah, I'm done. It does require sort of all the elements in some shape or form. And again, SBOM is just kind of the final artifact where you can show someone that you are what's in your software. To me, it's akin to what they used to make us do and list all the RPMs in a software and stuff like that, and you kind of had to manually like show the package numbers and whatnot. That used to be another deliverable many moons ago to our customers. SBOM is much better because it's automated and the format is known, so it's ingestible by machines if nothing else. But it's to me it serves a similar purpose at the moment.
And I'll agree with all of that, but I'll go one step further. I guess that SBOMs and SCAs tell you about the external software that's baked into the software you're developing, right? And so you still have to worry about your own like software development practices and making sure you're not putting vulnerabilities into your own code, right? And so I think that it's SCAs and SBOMs are super important to help understand, to help your customers understand what's baked into your products. But then it's still on you to make sure the code that you're writing and building on top of that, those other packages are secure and aren't introducing, other vulnerabilities, right? And I think that's the tension with kind of using an open source and relying on it. It's all great, but and SBOMs and SCAs can help us understand, is the software that I'm using have open source that's baked in there, but then the proprietary code is going to be just as potentially, susceptible to vulnerabilities. And then it's on you as the software developer to ensure you have your own kind of practices to make sure that the code you're writing is secure as well.
Yeah. I think what's interesting too is, our team here, and it was a new term for me, is XBOM, right? So it's that extended bill of materials where you're actually getting into like CBOM, which is cryptography, bill of materials, or an AI ML bomb, and then SaaS bomb, because everybody's relying on SaaS, right? So now you have all these different bill of materials with the VEX and everything like that. So now you're kind of, in some cases, you're getting more of a comprehensive and holistic view of the software you're running. So there are, some things that are being done, but again, back to the point we talked about originally is still is some education that needs to be done on SBOMs. I'm glad it's being heard more, but it is still something where I think as an industry, we have a little bit more work to do. Okay. So we've talked through a bunch of these different acronyms, and I thought it would be fun. We've talked through some of these different attacks, but is there any real world example that comes to mind immediately where understanding a security acronym from a development perspective could have significantly reduced risk? Or if it was just like I know we talked about Log4j, which obviously was a big CVE, but is there any other real world examples that you can think of? And also for folks at home, we're taking questions, so feel free to put them in the chat.
I mean, sort of back to my sort of open ports comment. So again, RDP is a big vector of attack. It's full of holes. So if you're not doing some type of active scanning and your services are reliant, or whatever you're providing to your customer is reliant on particular applications like RDP, you will get hacked. You do need that sort of active scanning, pen testing for your applications to make sure that, as Frank is saying, you haven't introduced some type of vulnerability. That's basically what the bad guys do. They do some form of pen testing to figure out whether there is a particular sequence of bytes or sequence that can effectively make the service open up, and so you can access the device under attack or whatnot.
Yeah, and I'll kind of stay at that macro level because I don't have any great kind of micro examples, but certainly, people may have seen in the news just last week, I think it was, or maybe more recently, but about the CVE, database being defunded, basically. We don't have to get into the politics or it seemed like it was sort of actually an oversight. It wasn't like on purpose, but anyways, I think just the reaction of the community to the security community saying, we can't lose CVE because this is super important to everything around cybersecurity, because it is, you know, if we talk about CVSS as like the common language, CVE is like the common index, right? Like it's the phone directory for, you know, understanding, you know, what vulnerability are we talking about, right? Like, and that naming system is just so critical to be able to say, you know, okay, we've patched this particular vulnerability. We know that, right? Or this, you know, this update fixes X, Y, and Z vulnerabilities, right? And so I think just, you know, seeing the kind of community reaction to the potential of CVE falling apart or just being unfunded was amazing to kind of see the quick reaction and the mistake corrected, or however it was that the funding will continue at least for the next year. So I do think that, you know, everybody recognizes the value of at least some of these acronyms.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think David may have just said it to the host and the panelists, but that defunding issue may have led to others creating their own vulnerability databases. And, you know, look, redundancy is probably a good thing. There may be some wasted effort, but given the current reliance of the cybersecurity world on CISA and other groups within the US government and question marks about their futures at the moment, I think it's unsurprising that we're seeing others thinking about standing up other ways of you know, classifying and categorizing and tracking vulnerabilities. And I also saw George's question in the chat. Yeah, hardware, for whatever reason, hardware is always less focused on than software. I remember, you know, we have kids, and when we were looking at like baby monitors to, you know, keep an eye on them when they're asleep, what did I do? I went to the internet and looked for known CVEs in in baby monitors, right, in hardware and like things like that. And I didn't, you know, I didn't pull out my old hacking tools and actually attack them and test the security, but like there were a few of them out there that had, you know, known vulnerabilities, right? And so I think that that's definitely something that, you know, hardware is, it's often a little bit less tracked, at least as I've seen, and in my own experiences, than software vulnerabilities, right? And I think that's concerning, right? Especially as, you know, as we all become more reliant on connected devices and all these types of things. And so I do think there's, you know, good information out there, but it's not as well developed as it is with the software side of things.
Yeah. I'm curious, Igor, what your perspective is on a hardware bomb. You know, I was at a conference a few weeks ago and I was talking with people. It was a hacking thing. And I asked, you know, like, how'd you get into it? And they said, like, many of them were like, I actually got into this because of hacking hardware. And that's what led them into getting into software hacking. And I was like, that is interesting. I would not have thought that. So, you know, you manage a large group. What is your thoughts on hardware bombs?
I mean, so we effectively have our selected vendors that we trust. Are they trustable? Who knows? So I don't really think there's a good, as George said, there is like published CVEs against hardware. I'd like to separate like the embedded images from hardware itself. To me, embedded images are software at the end of the day. They should be scanned. They fall under the SDLC and all that. However, because of their, I guess, rarity, like they're not just well covered. So embedded images are definitely whole, and there's not a lot of companies that do that for a reason, because there's many formats and it's not profitable because there's just few of them. But the hardware itself is absolutely vulnerable. I will not name countries, but some countries, you know, put hardware hacks in there and the chips, and they absolutely can be exploited. And we are kind of at the same place where we were, whatever, 10, 15 years ago, where you kind of trust these premier vendors that they produce software that's well vetted and not vulnerable. And we all know how that ended up. So I think HBOM is a big issue that needs to be solved. And I don't know, maybe Frank, you know better. I don't know of organizations that's actually doing that beyond Katie, like you're saying, hackers going at it and seeking these vulnerabilities. I mean,
Yeah,
people
I
are
mean,
trying to hack Intel, right? Intel chips. They're
yes,
publishing that stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, it's a tough one.
No, I fully agree. The hardware side of things has always been, just trickier, right? Because things are more unique. They're less
Right.
well studied. They're less well understood. I mean, I'll throw out another acronym that I'll admit to the first question had to go Google to remind myself what it means. But SCADA systems, right? So
Right. Right. Right.
supervisory control and data acquisition. I know what SCADA means, but not what it actually, what the acronym means. But these are like control systems in industrial context, right? So managing like water devices, gas devices,
Yep.
power, like all the, the critical infrastructure types of things. And I think for decades, right, that has been a known sort of weak spot. I think there's been improvements, but still, as the world again connects more and more things to the internet, then these types of, interactions between the cyber and physical systems are only going to become more flashpoints for potential problems, right? And to Igor's point, I think is we don't have to point at particular countries, but like a subset of a couple of countries that are particularly heavily developing these types of technologies and building these types of technologies. We don't always fully understand exactly what's baked into them, right? So I do think that there's both the question of the like an HBOM, right? But can we trust the HBOM if it's coming from a company that we're not so sure of, right? And I think not that everything comes back to open source, but in my mind it often does. But there's a big push for more open source hardware, right? So I think that at least in some contexts where that's sort of taken off, we can potentially use the fact that we can see all the design plans, we can see all the technical specifications and everything like that. That at least again gives us some level more transparency than kind of the closed black box of hardware that we often get, right, in many commercial settings. So absolutely, I think hardware is an area that needs more thought, research, concern, and focus. But indeed, there's much less information about hardware vulnerabilities and what goes into a piece of hardware than there is with software. But we're moving in the right direction, just slowly.
Great question to George at home. Just gonna give you 5 points for that. That was a good one. So I know we're about at time, but I just wanted to talk through some final thoughts on this. And for folks who are looking to get started, and better understanding these different security acronyms, is there a place they could go? I know we have a glossary on secure.software that they can go look at all these terms. But is there any other advice you have for folks who are starting to look at these different security metrics or acronyms that they're looking to place in their development practices? Frank, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's important to remember that there are tons of these, right? And you don't necessarily need to know every one of them. And so I think the glossary that you guys have is a great resource. But I think know the ones that are important for your job, right? And understand the ones that are particularly relevant to your role, to the type of company that you are. And I think that unless you're, going for a CISSP or some other security, certification, you don't need to memorize them all. You can always, go look things up on the internet, but have a sense of, the big ones and the most relevant ones to whatever your job and role are. If that's, software development, then there's going to be some subset that are more important. If it's, on the cybersecurity kind of attack and penetration and forensics type of side, then it might be a different set of them. And I think that's, you can never know all of these, right? And so know the ones that are most relevant to you, and don't be afraid to go look up the ones that you don't know.
Yeah, that's half the battle, is admit what you don't know and ask someone. Igor, your final thoughts?
Yeah, just definitely review your build process. Make sure that, there's plenty of open source tools that do a job. Maybe not a decent one, but a job at scanning your software. Definitely encourage you to do that. Also, make sure that you have a container registry or the like that also has some type of scanning for your final builds. just start incorporating some of these small steps in there. And you know, your customers will be grateful for it, and you will be at the end of the day, these days your customers will demand to see what your security posture is. So starting with some small steps, showing that you're serious about it, providing those types of reports will at the end of the day not only improve your security but your business overall.
All said. So I do have one bonus question. I'm gonna throw you for a loop on this one. But we haven't talked about AI and LLMs yet. So just wanted to see if you had any quick thoughts about emerging acronyms that maybe developers might need to know about that. Because AI is all the rage. I mean, people who are at RSA or any conference, it's every other third word you hear. So are there
Yeah,
any
so
emerging ones for that?
I'm sure there are some that I should be more on top of my head, but I will say that you know, AI and AI hacking and things like that, you just have to, the most important thing to know is that it's different, right? Like the vulnerability isn't something that's just going to let somebody into your system. The vulnerability is going to be something that causes the system to do something you weren't expecting, right? And so a few years ago, someone from Microsoft's AI Red team and I wrote an article about how AI, so we all at this point are probably familiar with cyber insurance, right? You can buy insurance to, you know, if you get hacked or your software gets hacked or whatever, you get some restitution. But AI insurance is just different, right? Like how can you make sure that, you know, a self-driving car doesn't drive into a ditch, right? Like, and can you insure against that? Or how do you make sure a home cleaning robot doesn't stick a wet mop into an electrical outlet, right? Like these are different than the vulnerabilities that we generally think about in cybersecurity. And so I think in the same way, you know, know that the attack surface is fundamentally different when we're thinking about AI. Yes, the traditional, you know, cybersecurity types of vulnerabilities also exist, but there's all these types of, you know, how do we make the AI do things that it's not supposed to do types of questions that are a whole field of study in themselves, right? That are yes, they're related to cybersecurity, but they're you know, they're a bit different, right? So I think as we think about, you know, the acronyms that are relevant, know that you know, we may have a whole new system to thinking about CVEs and CVSSs that are, there's actually MIT has a group that's developed something called the AI Risk Index. And it's an attempt to, you know, kind of do what CVE is doing and enumerate the risks that are known for AI systems, right? And thinking about, again, they're not the same as exact thing as what we think about with security vulnerabilities, but they're things that, you know, ways that AI could introduce risk to the you know, to the company or to the system or whatever it is. And so I think we'll see more work in that space to think about what is different about AI from what we know about traditional cybersecurity.
Igor, what about you from a practitioner standpoint? What advice would you give on this?
Don't trust Hugging Face, first of all. For those who know what that is, so it's going to become another kind of you will have to do some type of scanning and pen testing. So I think the acronyms, I mean, the methods will be similar. The actual procedures will be different. So this jailbreaking and things of that sort in like this pickle format that some models use is also prone to being able to, you can introduce malicious code into it. So there will be some method of scanning. There will be some method of verifying input into the models for training. So I think that you'll end up with a similar kind of set of steps you'll have to perform to ensure that the model you're trying to use is okay. But yeah, it's definitely not as mature as other things, but it's moving really, really fast. And of course, there's AI bomb already that folks are talking about. So it's going to be yet another thing you'll have to worry about and put some constraints around. We are thinking about it at ReversingLabs as well.
Well, Igor and Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to break these terms down for me today and just get into the weeds on some of these other attacks that we've heard about. We've had some fun detours, did a lot of learning. For those of you at home, tune in next month on the third Tuesday of the month. We're going to continue this webinar series for community, but also feel free to check out our free resources at secure.software, where you can learn more about these acronyms and see what's in your software, where we'll break down those terms for you and give you a score. We also have in the chat, we've put in some other resources for you about some other upcoming events we have, like Welcome to Cyclone DX with XBOM, where the AI meets the software supply chain. So feel free to check out those events. But again, Frank, Igor, those of you at home, thanks for staying with me this full hour. And till next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Bye.